Hello everyone, this is Isidore, and in this episode of the Magic Lores analysis I'll be discussing the Lore of Death. The Lore of Death is fairly common and is used by the Warriors of Chaos, the Beastmen, the Greenskins and the Vampire Counts. Especially in the multiplayer, it's a very popular lore due to a combination of powerful damage dealing spells and debuffs. The passive effect of this lore is life leeching. As long as the wizard with this skill is alive, your army gets faster recharge rate for your power points and gets a bigger reserve. It's a great skill since it means you get both more spells and you can cast them in faster succession, which will help you against any army no matter what units they bring. Aspect of the Dreadknight is the only buff found in this lore. For 17 seconds, it gives the target unit plus 8 leadership and terror. Thus, the unit will stay in battle longer while also making it much easier to force enemy units to rout near the unit you buffed. While this seems like a pretty good buff at first, the issue I have with it is twofold. First, the two effects don't supplement each other. Having that extra leadership doesn't help you terrify enemy units, and terror doesn't help a unit stay in combat if its leadership drops too low. Of course, that doesn't mean the spell is bad. It's extremely cheap for what it does at a mere 4 power points, and there will be plenty of situations where casting this spell can really help out. If you see a friendly unit getting close to routing, casting this spell on them may force that unit to stay in combat for another 17 seconds. If you see enemy units are getting close to routing, you may be able to force them to rout by casting Aspect of the Dreadknight on a nearby friendly unit. As such, this buff is rather situational, but for its cost in power points it's not bad at all, and synchronizes well with flanking units or leadership dependent units, like undead units, beastmen units, or units with frenzy. You can also overcast Aspect of the Dreadknight, which increases the duration of the buff to 31 seconds and turns it into an area of effect buff, while increasing its cost to 6 points. This is primarily useful when an entire flank is threatening to rout, since then you can give them all a nice long-lasting leadership buff for a still cheap price in power points. However, there's no need to overcast this spell if you want to apply the terror effect, since terror is already applied in a bubble around the target unit. Spirit Leech is probably the most feared spell in this lore. It deals high damage over time to a single unit for 8 power points. It doesn't sound that threatening until you realize people love using this against your lord or your expensive heroes. A few casts of this spell can kill weaker units, or at the very least drive them down to critical health, which is especially destructive if your army can't handle losing its lord. The spell does have a few vulnerabilities. First, it's not 100% reliable. There's a chance your target will resist some of the damage dealt, which can reduce the impact of the spell. Lords that have regeneration and other methods of healing themselves are also not that vulnerable to the effects of this spell, as health recovering effects will partially counteract the steady health drain, and the spell deals really bad damage against units that consist of more than a single soldier. As such, this is a specialist spell, even though it's quite powerful nonetheless. The spell can also be overcast to triple its casting range, while increasing its cost to 11 power points. This does fix the issue that you have to get pretty close to your target, well within range of enemy archers, to cast this spell. But unless you absolutely don't want to get close to your target, there's no point overcasting this spell. Soulblight is a powerful jack-of-all-trades area of effect debuff that weakens every part of its victims for 8 power points. It reduces the armor of all affected targets by 15 points, leadership by 8 points, and both weapon damage and missile damage by 22% for 16 seconds. This means Soulblight weakens the durability and killing power of all units hit by it, as well as making them more likely to rout. You can cast it on melee infantry, ranged infantry, artillery, cavalry. It weakens the overall effectiveness of every single unit type. There aren't a lot of debuffs that can claim that sort of versatility, but the big weakness of Soulblight is that it lasts for only 16 seconds. A comparatively short time compared to many other debuffs. However, it is the perfect debuff to cast at the center of an enemy army, since it will effectively weaken any unit type. It can also be overcast for 13 power points, which increases the duration of the debuff to 32 seconds. It's a valid choice to overcast this spell, as it fixes the big issue with the base spell, namely that it doesn't last very long. Doom and Darkness is the most powerful leadership draining debuff in the game. It drains the leadership of a single target by 16 points for 36 seconds for 9 power points. It's a really simple effect that you can use to rout key units, which you can then easily run down before the spell wears off and they recover. And it's an effective way of dealing with enemy units that are dependent on their leadership to be effective, like units with Frenzy, who lose a lot of their bonus stats when their leadership drops too low. However, the big flaw of this spell is while it reduces enemy leadership by an enormous amount, it doesn't reduce the combat effectiveness of most units unless you use it to force the enemy to rout, or crumble if you're facing undead. As such, if casting it doesn't actually rout your target, it won't help you win combat in most situations. Doom and Darkness becomes absolutely amazing once you overcast it. This increases the cost of the spell to 14 power points, but turns it into an area of effect debuff. This can easily force entire lines to break and rout if you cast it at the right time, and combines superbly with units that have terror. Just remember to run down the units you rout, otherwise the spell isn't that great of an investment. The Purple Sun of Xereus is a very cool looking vortex spell. It creates a vortex for 11 seconds costing 12 power points, that moves around and deals magic damage to whatever unit it moves over. As I've said before, I don't like vortex spells how they currently are, but one thing that must be said about the Purple Sun is that it's extremely disruptive. It literally pulls up entire infantry squads into the air and tosses them all over the place, which can effectively open up holes in enemy lines, even if the damage that this spell deals is negligible. However, you are investing a lot of power points in a spell that will only really move enemy infantry around. When overcast, the Purple Sun costs 17 power points and now lasts 22 seconds, doubling its duration. However, I highly disrecommend overcasting it, because after the initial 11 seconds of the base spell, it's very unlikely the vortex will still be touching enemy infantry. As such, I don't feel it's worth overcasting the Purple Sun, since the only benefit you get from it is the added duration. The Fate of Bjuma is another direct damage spell. Unlike Spirit Leech, the Fate of Bjuma is meant to damage units with a lot of soldiers. It deals pretty good damage over 20 seconds and can severely weaken even very elite infantry squads. However, for 13 power points it's a very expensive spell, and there's a chance your target will resist some of the damage, which will ruin part of your investment. It's also important to note that the Fate of Bjuma is more effective against squads that have a lot of soldiers in them than squads that have only a small number of soldiers in them. For instance, it will do more damage to a squad of goblins than it will do to a squad of trolls, simply because there's less soldiers in a squad of trolls than there are in a squad of goblins. The spell cannot be overcast. The Lore of Death is quite popular, and there are several spells behind that popularity. Spirit Leech and the Fate of Bjuma let you wear down key enemy units from afar. Meanwhile, Soulblight is a great all-round debuff that can weaken every unit in an enemy army, provided you can catch them in the area of effect. And Doom and Darkness is a very powerful situational debuff that you can use to selectively force enemy units to rout. It's exactly because the Lore of Death has so many great spells in it that makes it such a popular lore. If you want a lore that can either weaken specific enemy units by damaging them from afar, or you want access to the specific debuffs that this lore provides, then the Lore of Death is a great choice. That's it for the Lore of Death. If you liked this video, don't forget to press the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you'd like to support me in making more content, please visit my Patreon. You can find a link in the description below. Thank you for watching and see you in my next video.